Hey folks, Roots Week 4, Day 2. Sometimes I think we all know that it can be hard to tell the truth. It can be hard to tell the truth because sometimes the truth hurts and we don't want to hurt the person that we're talking to. We don't want to be offensive in any ways. And sometimes it just frankly feels easier to tell something that's a lie, that's not true, rather than say what actually is true. On the flip side of that, some people seem to get a special pleasure out of saying something that is offensive and hurtful. And so they're like, well, I'm just telling the truth. And, but we all know that they're saying it in such a way to be as hurtful as possible. As Christians, we are called to speak the truth in love. That means that we don't lie. We don't compromise the truth. We don't change what we believe to be true to accommodate what the culture says is right or something like that. But at the same time, when we speak the truth in love. That means we speak it with the hope that it helps the person that we're talking to rather than hurting them. When we talk about sin, all of that I just said is especially important. We should expect that the world will not like what the Bible has to say about sin. We should expect that people who are not believers are not going to agree with us and may possibly even be offended by what we say. Nonetheless, you and I, as believers, must stand for what the Bible says is true. With that being the case, though, we speak the truth in hope that it will bring about the salvation of other people, not to just hurt them or cut them or offend them for no reason whatsoever. We started yesterday in Genesis 3, which is all about the original sin, the fall in the garden. The rest of this week, we're going to be spending a lot of time in Romans, sort of getting into the nuts and bolts of what sin is and how sin works. And I want you to pay careful attention to what we're reading and what we're saying so far, because when we don't speak rightly about this, when we twist the truth to accommodate the culture, or when we just become hurtful and crass, we really distort who God is, we distort what He has said. And so it's important that we speak carefully when we get into these sorts of issues. So today's passage is Romans 1:18. It runs all the way through verse 32. I would encourage you to read all that, but I'm just going to sort of read the last little section from 28 to 32. And we'll get into some of the details here. It says, "And because they did not think it worthwhile to acknowledge God, God delivered them over to a corrupt mind so that they do not do what is right. They are filled with all unrighteousness, evil, greed, and wickedness. They are full of envy, murder, quarrels, deceit, and malice. They are gossips, slanderers, God-haters, arrogant, proud, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedience to parents, senseless, untrustworthy, unloving, and unmerciful. Although they know God's just sentence that those who practice such things deserve to die, they not only do them, but even applaud others who practice them." Now, I want to make some observations and sort of put this into context. First of all, this whole thing starts with the fact that people don't want to acknowledge God. Something that I think is important that we often don't emphasize at church is that in many ways, sin is its own punishment. In fact, that's sort of the logic of this whole chapter. Because people were godless, because they didn't worship the one true God, God handed them over into these other temptations and sins as a result of that. And so the various things that you see, whether that is sexual perversion or lying or violence or any of that sort of thing, those desires arise from the fact that God handed people over to them because they rejected Him. And so sin sort of begets sin. As we reject God, we fall more and more into sin, become less and less truly human in the process. And so when people say, well, this is just the way that I am, deal with it. Like, yeah, I believe it's just the way that you are, because you are a sinner, and I am a sinner. And just my natural, unsanctified, ungraced by God state, I'm a lot of bad things. But that doesn't mean that's who I was created to be. That just means that that's a result of sin being in me, because we are born by nature against God. Secondly, I want you to notice too some of the things that sort of happen there at the end. Did you notice that in the same breath as murder, Paul mentions other things like envy, gossip, disobedience to parents, being unmerciful and unloving? we tend to sort of have these tiers of sin and all this sort of thing and how terrible some are and that sort of thing. And we use that as a way to justify ourselves and say, well, at least I'm not a murderer or something like that. Well, evidently, envy, which is jealousy, gossip, being disobedient to parents, these things are every much a sin as murder is. And these are evidence of godlessness, of rejection of God in our lives. And so I think that we would all do well to read this and take a good hard look at ourselves and question whether or not we really are giving God the place that He deserves in our life. The cure to sin is not necessarily trying harder to overcome it, but it's becoming more in love and more focused on God. As we receive God's love and are loved by God, and as we fall more in love with God and who He is, then sin will begin to take care of itself.